other important events happening on behalf of Safer World and IPI. We would like to welcome you here today. As you can see, the format is different from the usual IPI forums that we host. We're breaking from the usual panel/audience format because we want to provide a different kind of conversation that encourages greater engagement among all of you, those sitting here at the table, but also those that are in the audience. So please be kind to us if there are any mistakes, as this is a new way of engagement. As the question for today's event signals, we want to discuss how the SDGs are supporting peace, justice, and inclusion. Usually in New York, we tend to focus on top-down approaches, from the global to the local. Today, we're intentionally shifting the question. We want to know how the 2030 agenda is being useful, and is it being useful at the local level? How is it leveraging actions for those that are working on the ground, like my colleagues here? But before we start, Ms. Sandra Pellegrom from the Permanent Mission of the Netherlands will offer welcoming remarks. Ms. Pellegrom, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and it's an honor and a privilege to be able to do this. First of all, the Kingdom of the Netherlands has been a very strong supporter of SDG 16 from the start. I think with many others we've made a very strong case to have it in the agenda because we strongly believe that development without peace and peace without development, and neither without human rights, are possible. So with SDG 16, we really feel that the 2030 agenda is the ultimate agenda for not only poverty alleviation, but also for the prevention of conflict. So I think it goes without saying, but just to say it at the start of the meeting, we're very happy that we have this SDG, and we also see it as a great opportunity as a cross-cutting SDG to drive the whole agenda. Now we are also a proud partner of the Pathfinder initiative, and within that initiative we are co-leading the Justice Task Force, the Task Force on Access to Justice, with Argentina, Sierra Leone, the elders, and we really feel that all these efforts within the Pathfinder initiative are very valuable. Now there's two reasons why I'm very excited about today's event. First of all, you already said it, I think, in New York we often look at very perhaps abstract issues, the indicators, the targets themselves, broader frameworks, but it's very exciting, I think, to have the opportunity today to listen from what people on the ground are actually achieving and how this agenda really helps to drive development forward. We're very excited to listen to your experiences, and I hope it will also feed into our discussions and to make them a bit more linked and grounded in the discussions that we have not only during the HLPF, but also throughout the year on supporting the 2030 agenda. Secondly, I think the issue of interlinkages. In my experience, this is my third HLPF. I have the feeling that we are getting better and better at really making these linkages across the different SDGs. And in particular, this week, the several events that I've been able to attend, and also the review. I was in the review on SDG 6. I really feel that we are starting to be much better at making these linkages. And I think this event and the way you set it up will really give us an opportunity to delve deeper into what these interlinkages can bring us, how they can catalyze change, how they can make our agenda more effective. And if you allow me, I would like to mention two examples, making the link to one specific other SDG that is also very relevant and dear to our heart, which is SDG 6 and the related goals on water. I think first of all, we still have an opportunity to bring SDG 16 issues much stronger into the debates on all the other SDGs. And in the field of water, for instance, I was recently at a very interesting discussion about how public administrations can drive the 2030 agenda forward and what capacities do they need. And we were discussing the example of water in the Netherlands, where we've experienced that a top-down, very regulatory approach of public institutions, and we have very strong institutions, is not always the best approach, and that innovating in institution building and capacities for managing the 2030 agenda should also focus on capacities of institutions to drive inclusive type of processes. And we had the example of how in the Netherlands, when we had flooding issues with several of our big rivers, instead of bringing new regulations down on the relevant stakeholders, the government said, no, let's all sit together, let's bring out the different values that different stakeholders attach to water, what are their interests, and let's together build a new policy that respects and that brings out the benefits for all the different stakeholders. And that led to a policy where we now let the river flow. We create spaces where the river can go if it starts to threaten to overflow. And it has really benefited all the stakeholders in different ways. So this is just an example of how within other SDGs, you know, the importance of building capacities of institutions to be able to drive inclusive processes, which I really think is one of the core elements of SDG 16. And the other example I wanted to mention, if I'm still allowed another minute, is that turning it around is also a very interesting thing. How can our work on different other SDGs also drive SDG 16? And again, I would like to mention the example of water. In our history in the Netherlands, we've seen that centuries ago, water was a real issue, and you know that a large part of our country is under sea level, so people were getting wet feet quite often, actually. And this led to an approach whereby the different stakeholders in the country, the gentry, the people who were tradesmen, the farmers, the poor villages, they all came together and they set up water boards to manage water and to make sure that they were pumping the water out of the polders so that you could have agriculture, protecting the country with dikes and so on and so forth. But it really created a very democratic, very early democratic system where all stakeholders were involved in managing this, you know, existential threat for a large part of the country. And I think it's really fed into our democracy and into the basically multi-party type of democracy where you really realize you always have to make compromises and you have to respect the interest of all the different stakeholders. And I'm not saying that you need a history of centuries in order to get to this point, but I do think it's an example of how our work on different SDGs can really try to drive inclusive processes, bringing out different interests and building on this type of, you know, not top-down approach, but really bottom-up approach involving all the voices and also allowing even those left furthest behind to be part of that discussion. And I hope that today's discussion will help us get inspiration to really take all the experiences and the good advice that you bring to us from the field also into our discussions on all the other SDGs, because I think what you do is relevant for every single SDG we discuss. So without further ado, I just want to thank you for the opportunity. We are very proud to be a supporter of the work of Safer World in the Horn of Africa, and very much looking forward to hearing from all of you.
Thank you so much. And you know, it's great that you spoke at the national level how inclusion, which is such a big part of SDG 16, has been relevant for the Netherlands, because often when we talk about SDG 16, it seems also not like a universal equation. Usually we only listen from developing countries, so it's also very important that we hear that it is relevant for all countries. So thank you very much. We will now shift to Mr. Afkashe, who's from Safer World and is located in East Africa. You have the floor.
Thank you, Jumena, and thank you all for being here. For those who don't know us, Safer World is an international organization working on to prevent conflict and build safer lives in more than 20 countries around the world. Safer World, we're pushing for peace and justice to be included in the SDGs since 2012. And now that it's been included in the 2030 agenda, we are working on putting this agreement into action. But we know from the past experiences that UN frameworks do not always translate necessarily into local action. Therefore, SafeRwell have tried to work out best to make this agenda stick at national and local level. So we have been piloting a project in the Horn of Africa on how peace, justice, and inclusive societies can work in these contexts. This is currently supported by the Dutch government, and we are beginning to see some successes. In the context, we are working specifically Sudan, Uganda, and Somalia. Throughout this work, number one, we have tried to look for ways to legitimize the SDGs through the national development plans. This provides a hook for us to work on the agenda at a national level. Number two, we have tried to build on existing experiences, capacities, and initiatives of the civil society organizations and government champions already working on these issues to see if collaboration between them under the SDGs banner can help mean they become more than the sum of their parts. Number three, we have raised awareness to promote and promote ownership within society so that the SDG can become nationally and locally owned. And finally, in order to push a new action on peace, justice, and inclusion through SDGs, we look for key advocacy moments like elections to try and push the SDGs higher up the agenda in country which can lead to specific commitments. This blueprint is beginning to have some impact that shows how the SDGs can contribute to further justice, peace, and inclusive societies at the national level. My colleagues from Sudan, Uganda, and Somaliland will be able to share exactly how this is happening with their more in-depth examples. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Hassan? From
The Somaliland Non-State Actors Forum.
you have the floor.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully everybody can hear me. My name is Zainab. My name is Zainab Hassan. I'm from Somaliland and I work for an organization called Somaliland Non-State Actors. In this organization we work in two main areas. The first one is to enhance the development of civil society to creating a better networking and coordination. And we also work on increasing the participatory role for civil society, especially the non-state actors, to have space in decision making and issues concerning inclusion, peace, and security. For the last 2 years in Somaliland, we were working on increasing the awareness of SDGs, and we pushed hard for the SDGs to be included in the National Development Plan. But as we all know, the National Development Plan doesn't translate into actions. So therefore, we took initiatives to conduct consultations across the country on the national and the regional level. And from these consultations, we came out with key priority actions. As you might see in these reports that we handed to you, and you will see how is the SDGs are relevant to Somalia. I would like also to share some few success stories that we had through our advocacy for the SDGs. In terms of the inclusion and gender participation, For the first time, the Somaliland has approved 20% quota for women, and now the women will have 18 seats out of the 82, unlike the current parliament where we have only one lady inside the parliament, which is a success. So the other example we have is ending the FGM, and now that is approved by the religious leaders who were actually the main obstacle. And they came out with the reconciliation fatwa that will end this act. We also had the success in ending the violence against women, where both houses, the lower house and the upper house, and the president approved the sexual offense bill. In terms of the rule of law, we actually started consultations with the civil societies, and we came with key priorities. Access to justice is something very important for the Somalilanders. And luckily, the Chief of Justice in Somaliland saw and recognized our effort. And now himself is working together with civil society to create a strategy where the civil society will have a significant contribution in justice. This is might seem a very success comparing to your contest, but this is, we have actually a long way to go. But this shows how the SDGs work in Somaliland, particularly the SDG 16 plus. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And I would like to reiterate, these are not small achievements. I think this is precisely what I think the global community needs to hear. This type of examples on the ground that then can help guide the policy discussions here. Mr. Dr. Suleiman, you have the floor. You come from the University of Khartoum in Sudan.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Abdel Elias. I work for the Economic and Social Research Institute of the University of Khartoum. SDGs 16 lies at the top of the development agenda in Sudan because of the prolonged civil war that persisted to drain the scarce human and economic resources of the country and people. As you know, my country has been facing civil war since its independence in 1956. As such, SDGs 16 remains the most or the key development agenda. With support from UNDP, Sudan has identified SDGs 16 as one of the 3 priority areas for Sudan, together with promoting gender equality and promoting or enhancing agricultural productivity for poverty reduction. In Sudan, we have been working jointly with several world to raising awareness about SDGs 16 through addressing key challenges facing realization of this important goal. In this respect, one of the most important initiatives was organization of a multi-stakeholder workshop on SDGs 16 last month. The most important outcome of the workshop were: number 1, initiating a multi-stakeholder dialogue on SDGs 16 by bringing together representatives from the government, CEOs, and academia. Number 2, identifying 3 key priority areas pertaining to SDGs 16, which include access to justice, building culture of peace, building transparent and accountable institutions. Number 4, proposing the formation of a permanent multi-stakeholder dialogue on SDGs 16+. It is also important to mention some of the key important challenges that need to be addressed in the future. The first challenge is fostering multi-stakeholder dialogue on SDGs 16+ and the related issue. Number 2, raising awareness of people at local level. Number 3, helping many stakeholders to set actionable SDGs 16+ priorities. And finally, building the capacity of civil society organizations to be more active in the realization of SDGs 16. Before I conclude, I must admit that SDG planning framework has helped in addressing these important development challenges by bringing together a wide range of multi-stakeholders who have been working separately to address the issue of peace, justice, and institutional capacity development in Sudan. Finally, I would say that we still need to find ways and means to support the inspiration of people as reflected in the three priority areas set during the last workshop. In this respect, the support of the international community remains a key element in responding to these priorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that these presentations really highlight how the 2030 agenda can be used as a platform, a neutral platform, to bring different stakeholders together that before perhaps they wouldn't come together. It's providing a space for civil society organizations to organize and to influence decision-making policies, among other things. We will be presenting a report from research we've been doing in 5 regions in September, but some of the findings very much resonate with what we've been hearing today. For example, the 2030 agenda can also address the sequencing dilemma that we face so many times. What comes first? Is it peace or development? And if it's both, how do we handle it? Because then there's all these competing priorities on the ground, and it becomes very difficult to get organized in a synchronized manner. Secondly, in conflict-affected countries, everything is political. Development is de facto political. So how can we help make the 2030 agenda become a new social contract between state and citizen? Can it be that? Can it help build that bridge between citizen and government? And thirdly, can it help us find ways to reduce corruption? We've noticed in our initial research in the regions that corruption has been plaguing both developed and developing countries and has really eroded the trust in citizens. So how can the 2030 agenda help us with some of those challenges? So we are now passing to the interactive part of the session. We have prepared 3 guiding questions for you that are on the screens. I know that there are many people listening, so for that I'm going to read the questions. Does the 2030 agenda provide a useful blueprint to link sustainable development and peace at the national level? 2, is the 2030 agenda supporting local actors to expand access to justice, promote the rule of law and inclusion? And 3, are there risks that the SDG 16 agenda is co-opted by forces working against the spirit of the 2030 agenda? If so, what is the best way to respond to these challenges? I feel that question 3 needs a little bit of explaining, which means that when we were adopting the 2030 agenda, the geopolitical landscape was very different than it is today. So how can we work to achieve this framework despite or in spite of the different geopolitical trends that we're seeing today? So I'm holding the globe, we're holding the globe together. And once the 3 minutes are up, I'm going to hold the globe. This is a very subtle sign that you have to wrap up, because I want to give every one of you the floor, and I also want to have some time for the audience to interact with all of you. So Ambassador Hoshino from Japan will kick off the discussion. Thank you.
I was not that prepared, but I'm very delighted to be here. And I like this exciting setting. And, well, those are very legitimate questions, and I think the first question: does the 2030 agenda provide useful blueprint? This is everything is not perfect. So that. Well, of course, this is a useful. If there are some problems, why don't we make the best use of this? I think this is a starting point to think about. And what else? You talked about the competition between, the development on one side and the peace on the other hand. But what we need is both. So, why those two doesn't work together? Sometimes, I ask to myself. Usually, we have a problem of ego, in ourselves. What we are doing is more important than others. And other things the same way, the other things that what I'm doing is better and more effective than others. But on the ground, what we need is both. So from my Japanese perspective, what we need is a kind of respecting what the others are doing, or to harmonize, that harmony is a kind idea that the Oriental culture treasure most. So is to bring those together, So respecting and harmonize what they are doing. I think it's the best way rather than talking about competition. Finally, I'd like to emphasize another concept. Human security. I have a colleague from UN side, Human Security Unit, Milnas. One of the basic message of the SDGs is to leave no one behind. But I think we need to find another concept which to complement leave no one behind. That is the idea. What happens? What do we do when people are left behind? See, that human security is an idea to help people who are left behind. So in that way, the leave no one behind as a goal, that's a very important one. But at the same time, we may find an avenue with a tool to help it from the peace direction or to the development side, or from the human dignity side, to try to help people who are left behind. That's the human security idea. I think those are very important methods. Other than that, I think we can do it in a very innovative way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I think that your pragmatic approach, that we can't think that the perfect is the enemy of the good, as we know. So thank you for these remarks. Christina is next. I have to tell you there's no list of speakers. So if you want to speak, please raise your flag like this. I've been just counting with the brave courage of my colleagues, so there's no list. So please, if when you want to speak, just raise your flag. Christina, thank you.
Thank you, Jimena. I come from 1 year in Lebanon, so really on the ground and working and living in a neighborhood where there was war in Lebanon. It was a Shia neighborhood. With the war, it became a Christian neighborhood, and now with the war in Syria, it's becoming a Sunni Syrian neighborhood, and that in 20 years. And in this neighborhood, I was committed with an organization that decided that everybody is welcome, regardless of the religion, regardless of the nationality, regardless of the social status. Just that, to have people in the hugely complex history of Lebanon that agree to work together and say everybody is welcome, is building peace at its core. That they didn't only do that, they also agreed to put their service for those that are the poorest and the weakest in the neighborhood. How are we attentive to them? How do we work with them? And so from that experience, I would like to answer a couple of the questions, because there are many and little time. So how is this agenda useful? First thing to say is that the SDGs, and I fought to have this agenda for 5 years, it was my job. It is a political agenda. So it is useful if governments agree to use this agenda, and if governments put means of implementation into the agenda. Otherwise, trying to set the agenda at the local level, at grassroots level, is really useless. Because for peace and social justice and inclusion, the human rights agenda at the local level, grassroots level, is more useful for very many reasons. It resonates much more with the organizations. It is there to stay. It's not a 15 years agenda, and it is a legal framework, and we have agreed to it. So, but to come back to the SDGs, what is missing? And I say it from my experience. I saw people suffering. I can't describe, but I also saw an environment crashing. I also saw how these people had to live in trash and how the Mediterranean, that is a common good, is being polluted because with 1.5 million refugees, a 4 million country can't deal, that went through war and destroyed all the institutions, can't deal with the most common thing, that is dealing with the trash you produce. And so this agenda brings that pillar of the environment in a context where we have refugees, we have very good institutions, we have a history, but if we don't integrate the three pillars that are the environment, that are poverty, eradication, and development, and peace, Lebanon is a good example of this country can be economically very active, but for the poorest people, for the refugee people, and for the next generations, there is no future. So in this sense, this agenda, even if I say it's very difficult to say at the grassroots level, it brings the pillars together that need to be for peace, for poverty eradication, and for a planet that will survive.
Thank you so much for this really insightful comment. One of the reports we just published is on Lebanon and the SDGs and how it's kept stable despite the war in Syria. How has it done that, and how can the SDGs help transcend the sectarianism aspect? So thank you, Christina. Who else would like to speak? Ira, and then start.
Let me jump to the opportunity and let me move away from the questions and respond to some things that have been already addressed, because I think that the conversation is running interesting. I think that two things that I picked up. First, politics, right? And I think that this is what Goal 16 does, right? It brings politics to the center of the development process. We cannot understand, development in its entirety without understanding what are the incentives, what are the interests, what are the drivers of conflict, of peace, and inclusiveness. So I think that Goal 16 is nothing less than the realization that we need to have a governance-informed development process happen, first. Second, I think that trust in institutions, right? And this is what part of what Goal 16 is trying to do. What do we mean by trust in institutions, right? With the advances in technology, we keep seeing this, right? It's easier for citizens to know what is not working than to appreciate what is working. How do we help governments to do more of what is working, right? And not in the, or how do we help governments to do more of what is working that is in detriment to helping non-governments to visibilize what the government is failing to do, that adds to this lack of trust in government, right? Ms. Pellegrin, you mentioned about the importance of public institutions and the strengthening of public institutions. Goal 16, yes, we are technocrats, yeah, we say yes, 16.6. Right? It's all about that, and it's the enabler of the entire development agenda. And yes, we can go to the sector level. For water, you need strong public sector water institutions. For education, you need strong ministries of education, and for health, and blah blah blah. But then, how do we do that? My impression, and this is based on several analyses that has been done, is that unfortunately, because of this lack of trust, we tend to retreat from working with public sector institutions, right? There's a very famous review in post-conflict situations, the UN response to strengthening core public administration functions. We found two major conclusions. The UN at large is doing too little, too late, And not only, and the second conclusion is that was not only too little too late, is that what has been done was not really suitable to the context, because we were ignoring the politics and we were trying to implement this best practices approach. What happens in the Netherlands on water issues has to work in Sudan, because it has been proved to work in the Netherlands, right? Just an example, I'm not saying, right? Just an example. So how do we move away from that? And I think that I think that has to be part of the discussion. How do we merge these? So when I hear questions like, are the SDGs working? Yes, they are working because they are nothing differently than countries have been doing for the past 500 years. Right now, what we are trying to add is a framework, trying to strengthen that functionality. But the question is, right? It's twofold: the trust that we have to place, and how do we recuperate the trust, right? Now, what is an effective institution? I would like to challenge somebody to tell me what is the definition of an effective institution. It's hard, right? But when you see one, then you can say, yes, this is effective institutions. So how do we move from that, right? And the strength of the institutions will come from the inside. Most of the time, it will be most difficult to bring that strength from the outside of the institution. But just my 2 cents for the conversation.
Thank you, Jairo. I think this is really good. So we're adding 2 more questions to our discussion. How to build trust, and what is an effective institution? What does it look like? Mustafa, please.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Actually, I suppose maybe building on what you said, which is about how do you recuperate the trust, both within, I think from the communities to the United Nations, bilaterals, and also the governments, and then how to do it. And I would say, actually, I come from, as the Ambassador Oshina said, from the Human Security Unit. We've had a trust fund that has been doing this integrated, multi-sectoral approaches for very, very many years. And so we do have a lot of experience on what now has become the 2030 agenda. And one of the things that I would like to highlight is that we really have to be very careful not to look at the goals as standalone objectives. I think, unfortunately, we continue to do that, even though in the preamble of the 2030 agenda, it is explicitly highlighted that none of these goals can be achieved without the other goals, as of course relevant to the context in which we find them. So from our sort of experience, of course, we're coming from the human security lens, and of course human security sort of presents this breadth of what it means for a person to feel secure in sort of every aspect of their life, whether it's social, economic, political, community, so on and so forth. And so what we do is we really look at what is for people to feel secure, which I think is also the whole objective of 2030 agenda, that you live in a society in which you have the sort of aspirations of development, aspirations of resilience, so that again, something crisis doesn't hit and you lose all of the development gains that you have, and you of course live in peace and stability so that you can get to those sort of objectives. So we start with looking at the needs and vulnerabilities on the ground. So I think as it was mentioned by the Permanent Mission of the Netherlands, really I do think this bottom up. I really do think that, at the end of the day, the UN, government, and also the agenda is accountable to people. We have to be able to show that we are actually making a difference in people's lives. We're not just making goals for the success, for the sake of some checklist that we can say, well, we did goal this and goal that and the other, and therefore we have succeeded. I think at the end of the day, it really does come back to how people's lives have been impacted. And so there I would say that, what becomes extremely important is even looking at the SDG 16, the root causes of conflict are not conflicts, are oftentimes many other things. It can be natural disasters, it can be exclusion, it can be, for example, Liberia, socioeconomic the Arab Spring, the upspringing in the Arab region was also food security. I mean, and water actually, and all of these other factors. So I do think that, again, because initially when it was spoken of the SDG 16, it was very much within that goal. And I do think that, we really need to look at different entry points in which we can come in order to achieve, the SDG 16. And so I would just like to say that, what we really need to do is really to kind of move away from the silos, which remains a big problem in the UN. Believe me, as I said, we have over 13 years of experience. It still is very hard to get the UN system to work together, let alone to get other actors on board with the UN. So I think we need to come up with frameworks and tools, and human security is one which can be expanded upon, but I'm sure there are other tools, which they are truly multi-stakeholder, UN and non-UN. Because the other reality that we have seen from the experiences that we have is that, a lot of the times, the international staff, yes, is very important, but at the end of the day, it is about capacitating national staff, it's about capacitating national communities. Oftentimes, international staff can't even go and do the work that they're supposed to do within the countries in which, a lot of conflict or fragility or things are. So I would just sort of say that we should really, as I said, look at different entry points, look at the integrative nature of the 2030 agenda, look at the fact that people are supposed to be our entry point as well. That is supposed to be what we're accountable to at the end of the day when it comes to 2030 agenda. And I think if we take all of that, actually it becomes rational. I mean, if you do the analysis from a very comprehensive way of looking at people's lives and not necessarily from your own expertise or interest, that it would be very easy to bridge expertise. I mean, it would be, again, not that difficult to get a humanitarian person to come sitting next to the development person, because at the end of the day, the community in which you are working in has humanitarian needs that have to be addressed, but also is hungry to get out of the humanitarian assistance sort of framework and go towards the aspiration of peace and stability and a future in which they can see their children grow and have all that all of us aspire to. So on that note, I will stop.
Great, thank you. And thank you for the key message that the entry point and the central priority remains to be people that we're trying to serve. Thank you. Gay.
Thank you. I want to underscore and agree with many of the things that were said. But first, let me thank you for this new format. I think it's great that you're experimenting, and I hope it'll work well and you'll do it again. I'd like to share some of the data that came from research done by Peace Direct and IPI about a year ago, where we surveyed local peace builders to hear what their views of sustaining peace were. And they were very close to what our presenter said, and particularly what Dr. Suleiman said about fostering interactive dialogue, raising awareness of people at the local level, and building capacity of local civil society. And so, in line with what others were said, when we asked them what they thought the SDGs had that was relevant to their work as peace builders, 4 things stood out. And just as you said, it was not siloed, and it was not only in a traditional kind of political process way. First was poverty alleviation, and second was gender equality, so important to SDGs. Third was unemployment and income generation, youth work, and reconciliation and social trust. So the reason why I mention these is because some of the biggest challenges are addressing those other things and realizing how much they are connected with SDG 16 and all the other SDGs. And when we asked the peace builders what to do about these, they said 3 things entirely close to what our colleagues said. Encourage grassroots civil society to get more involved, strengthen partnerships with those local stakeholders, and allow the communities to own the process. It can't be that the international community kind of sells the ideas and they are bought, but really they have to emerge from local civil society, and so their visions are empowered about what a sustainable, peaceful solution would look like. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you so much for bringing that last point on ownership. I think that is a key message that we all need to hear and be reminded of. And then David, thank you.
Yeah, I would also like to echo what some of the statements just made. First, I represent an organization that is itself a network of peace building and conflict prevention organizations around the world. And I do think that there still needs to be more effort put forth in explaining what the SDGs are to civil society in a lot of countries who may have heard of the idea but don't quite understand how to use them and how it can be helpful for them and how to really integrate it into their work. So there needs to be some more work done there. But for the organizations that are familiar and are working on SDGs, they have found them to be very helpful, not least because the SDGs and the comprehensiveness of the SDGs really complements the wide scope of the work done by our local partners. Because when you have a peace building organization, a very small one based in a community, they don't work on one particular issue, they work across all of them. And so the SDGs really reflect that, and they find that to be very helpful in terms of being able to advocate for their work. And just some of the examples that we have is that, you know, young women in particular have felt empowered through the SDGs, having these indicators, having these goals, and having the member states subscribe to these in the national governments, and they are able to kind of voice their considerations and their concerns better and more powerfully because of the SDGs, because they can stand behind Goal 16 or Goal 5 and use that in their work. And in terms of, you know, kind of addressing the third question, I think, you know, it does present a really great entry point for a lot of civil society organizations to begin working with national governments or working with the UN where they are present. But there is a concern that only certain issues are taken forward, and as you know, some of my colleagues have said, there really needs to be that comprehensive approach to the SDGs. It can't just be picking certain goals or certain indicators within those goals. It really needs to maintain that sort of coherent and inclusive approach across all of them. And I think I'd also just like to say, you know, and where the SDGs have been helpful for civil society to get in the door and to be more included in these processes, the geopolitical landscape, as you mentioned earlier, has meant that there has been an increasingly very shrinking space for civil society in a lot of these processes, and I think that's something that we really need to watch moving forward and really push to make sure that there is that space for civil society to continue working with all of the stakeholders on SDGs and on SDG implementation.
Thank you, Laurie. And I feel that the 2030 Agenda's call for inclusion hopefully is one of the aspects that can help stop the shrinking of that space. But thank you for bringing those points to light. David from CIC, you being a force of nature in the Pathfinders. Thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to your insights.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. I wanted to address the third question on the risks, because maybe that one will be neglected. I think we obviously do face very real risks. You said we're not in the same world that we were in when the SDGs were agreed. We're arguably not in the same world we were in yesterday, even. And that's not just because my heart was broken by the World Cup results yesterday. So I really feel that this is part of the fight back, and I want to talk a little bit more about those risks and how we respond to them. I think this has come up a few times. I think the first risk is that we get stuck in the SDG 16 silo, and this is where the concept of SDG 16 plus comes in, of taking a much more expansive view of the targets that talk directly to peace, justice and inclusion in the sustainable development agenda, really reaching out into other goals, and that's even before you get into the broader interconnection. So that's the first risk, that we get stuck in our silo. Second, there's a real risk that we're too technical. We focus on targets, on indicators, all the processes. I've been to quite a few countries recently talking about SDG 16 plus, and you can just see that from policymakers through to civil societies, the technicalities are the real turn-off. That's not what they want to talk about. They want to talk about issues, the challenges, the reality of what we're trying to change in the world, and that's why I think well, an anecdote, we had a finance minister early on in our process say to us, we fought so hard for this goal, harder than any other country, and now we've got it, we don't know what to do with it. So it's our job as a community to start articulating what action looks like. And for those of you who haven't seen it, the roadmap on peaceful, just, inclusive societies is a first attempt to begin to do that, to get practical about what action could be. Third, the risk, I think, that we focus too much on problems rather than on solutions. I think advocacy around problems is pushing people into corners politically. The solution brings them out of those corners. And there are some people working with some of the tribes within the SDG 16 plus umbrella who've done a really good job recently articulating what the solutions look like. I think on the group working on violence against children, the Global Partnership on Violence Against Children, the INSPIRE strategies, a common international package of evidence-based strategies for ending violence against children, that now has, I think, 22 or 23 countries working on implementation and working together on that. So from problems to solutions. Fourth risk, that we don't set any priorities for implementation. I had the honour of hearing the Somaliland presentation in a lot more detail yesterday, and they have done a tremendous job of boiling down a lot of complexity into some clearly articulated priorities for implementation. Again, in country after country I go to, national development plans don't work. They're too sprawling, they're too complex, they sit on the shelf gathering dust. We need to use SDG 16 plus to really get granular about what matters and what change we're going to drive. Fifth priority is we do a lot in a lot of places, but we don't really demonstrate substantial transformative change anywhere. And that leads to a loss of confidence and faith over time. That's why we've used the concept of pathfinders, the idea that in the early years of the agenda, we need leadership at every level, whether it's government, civil society, private sector, to demonstrate that change is possible, to set the path for others to follow. If we can do that in the first half of the 2030 agenda, then this part of the agenda will thrive and grow. If we can't, we will almost certainly lose momentum. I've lost my numbers. Fifth, that we're not sufficiently ambitious. I think we need to, as a community, mobilise around some key global and regional asks that reflect the ambition at national and local levels. As an example of a community that's done that, I think quite successfully, I'd say oceans. They've mobilised around plastics, and they've really put oceans onto the front page as an issue that people are genuinely talking and debating about. For the Pathfinders, we're working, as Sandra said, on the task force on justice. I'm sure Coco will talk about that in a minute. We also think there's a massive opportunity around 16.1, which says we're going to significantly reduce all forms of violence everywhere. And clearly the agenda around social, political, economic inclusion is an area where we should be developing some really big asks. And finally, the final risk is that we fail to mobilise as a community. We're many scattered ships out on the water. Many of you have heard me use this metaphor before. We need to come together as a fleet, and our big opportunity is over the next year. In July next year, we have the HLPF on SDG 16, also SDG 10, a real focus on inclusion at ministerial level. And then in September, for the first time, heads of state, heads of government come together to review the agenda as a whole. So what we're saying as a community, or beginning to say as a community, I think, is that this is the year to stand up for SDG 16 plus, to stand up for peace, to stand up for justice, to stand up for inclusion, to work together and make sure that we have a big bang in July, and then we take the greatest hits of that to the heads of state and heads of government in September, make a lot of powerful new commitments to implement, and then set ourselves on the way to achieving measurable, demonstrable, transformative change by the end of the second 4-year cycle in 2023. And if you're interested in that, we have a meeting, a side event, but not a panel, an opportunity to celebrate and make a promise and a commitment to the future on Monday evening. It's the 16th, SDG 16 is plus on the 16th, so please come.
Thank you so much, and thank you for addressing the question on risks. I think those are really great comments.